At the fundraising dinner, my wife said, "You were just a plumber. You shouldn't have come to embarrass yourself. Wait outside." I didn't challenge her. I was calm. But when the CEO came and introduced me as his business partner, everyone was shocked. My wife called me a traitor, but I had already seen the kind of woman she was. I made sure she regretted what she did earlier. Let me tell you how everything unfolded. I was tightening a brass fitting under a client's kitchen sink when Cassandra called. Her voice came through sharp and thin, like it always did when she was pretending not to be annoyed but absolutely was. "There's a fundraising dinner next Saturday. Black tie. Very important. It's at the Meridian Hotel downtown. My boss will be there." I wiped my hands on a rag and stood, the socket wrench still warm in my palm. "You want me to come?" There was a pause. "So brief you'd miss it if you didn't know her the way I did." "Of course. You're my husband." She never said you'd enjoy it or you should be there. Just you're my husband. Like it was a social obligation, not an invitation. I imagined her at her desk in that marketing firm downtown, surrounded by curated furniture and colleagues with LinkedIn-perfect smiles, her voice an octave higher when she spoke about me. "Oh, Elijah? He runs a plumbing thing. Never a business. Never a company." But I said yes, not because I needed to be there, but because I already knew what Cassandra didn't. That dinner? It wasn't just any fundraiser. It was being hosted by William Crest, the same William I'd partnered with 2 years ago when his property firm started gobbling up old brownstones to renovate and flip. The same William who once said, "You've got an eye for value, Elijah. Let's build something." Still, I kept that part to myself. The night of the event, I wore the tailored navy tux Cassandra had insisted I buy years ago for her cousin's wedding. She, of course, had gone all out, sleek black gown, heels that clicked like accusations on tile, a diamond pendant I'd bought for our 10th anniversary when business had finally turned the corner. As we stepped into the hotel lobby, she scanned the crowd. Everyone there looked like they'd stepped out of a financial magazine. Suits sharp enough to cut paper. Smiles that said, "I know what your portfolio is worth." Cassandra leaned in and whispered, "Please just don't talk too much, okay? This isn't like your client barbecues." I turned my head slowly to look at her. What's that supposed to mean? She waved a hand, fake laughter riding the edge of her sigh. "I'm just saying, these are corporate types. CEOs, lawyers, politicians. You know, white collar." I felt something twist in my gut. Not anger, not yet, but something colder. Something that reminded me I wasn't standing next to a partner tonight. I was standing next to a critic who thought she was a chaperone. "I'll be quiet," I said flatly. "Don't worry." As we entered the ballroom, Cassandra fluttered from table to table, greeting people like a socialite in training. I stayed close to the wall, hands in my pockets, watching. I didn't mind being quiet. I'd made a whole life out of listening to pipes rattle in silence. But the way she looked at me, as if I were a liability, an unwanted plus one, not at something inside me. Then it happened. She turned back to me just before dinner started and said, "Actually, can you just wait outside? I don't want you to feel awkward or out of place." I blinked. "Wait outside? You're just a plumber, Eli," she whispered. I was darting around to make sure no one heard. "It's better if you don't embarrass yourself." Or me. For a long second, I couldn't speak. My jaw clenched so tightly I could feel the pulse in my ears. But then I exhaled, slow and even. I looked at her, really looked. Not as my wife. Not as the woman I'd fallen in love with on a rainy afternoon 15 years ago when she helped an old lady cross the street. But as she was now, polished, pretentious, terrified of being judged by the wrong people. I nodded once. "All right." She smiled, relieved. "Thank you. I promise I'll tell you all about it after." I turned and walked toward the exit, but not out of the hotel. I took a detour behind the partitioned section of the ballroom where the event staff milled about. William had said he'd call me up near the end of the dinner when the real announcements were made. The awards, the new partners, the expansion project, and I was the guest of honor. Let her sit there. Let her sip champagne and gossip with women who couldn't tell the difference between hard work and high birth. Let her think I was outside, pouting in a parking lot, because in just over an hour, she, and everyone else in that room, was going to learn exactly who Elijah the plumber really was. And I couldn't wait to see her face. I slipped behind the grand curtains that draped the ballroom, the heavy fabric muffling the gathered laughter and polite applause as I leaned against the coolness of the wall. From this vantage point, I could still hear Cassandra's laughter echoing, sharp and hollow, as she chatted with other wives of the elite, her voice carrying the thin veneer of superiority she wore like jewelry. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, a blend of vanilla and something floral that always reminded me of promises made on better days. Beneath that silk exterior, though, I registered the slight tremble in her voice when she saw me shift in the shadows, as though she suddenly feared I might step forward and shatter the illusion she'd worked so hard to create. I didn't step forward. I stayed quiet. Still, because I already knew that the true moment was coming. I'd spent months watching pipelines, not fundraisers, but I could read the signals in the CEO's tone, in the way the staff adjusted the microphone stand. The crescendo was near. Tonight was his night, and mine in disguise. I remembered how things started for me and William Crest. 2 years ago, he'd strolled into the showroom of my modest plumbing business, a blueprint in one hand and a hesitant question in the other. "Mr. Clark," he'd said, with a polite nod that felt too formal for what was to come. "I'm expanding into the Riverton Tower project and heard you've got an eye for quality and efficiency." I'd tuned him out at first. He could have been another developer passing by. But then he explained how he needed someone grounded, someone who didn't just talk about pipes but knew how water flowed through them, who cared that plumbing didn't fail in the dead of night. I'd shown up on site one Thursday at dawn, covering broken joists with plywood, climbing into crawl spaces, tightening fittings until they glowed copper. By lunchtime, he'd offered a partnership on the spot. I'd hesitated for a heartbeat. Because I'd never partnered with anyone, especially not someone from his world. But I'd said yes. And just like that, my modest company started a trajectory I barely dared imagine. As I watched from the sidelines, I let the sound of crystal glasses clinking, of waiters gliding through the aisles, and of distant piano music wash over me. Every laugh, every polite cough, every muted squeak of sequin gowns brushing carpet reminded me why I was here. I was behind the scenes here, literally and figuratively, and I liked it that way. I built my life quietly. At 4 in the morning, I was checking that each of my trucks were on schedule. At 6, I was doing invoices and negotiating margins. At night, I sat in my truck, radio off, thinking through last week's job and next week's estimate. I was a man who had learned the discipline of pipes and budgets, none of it glamorous, but all of it real. And the contrast to this glossy conference hall, with chandeliers dangling like crystal raindrops, couldn't be sharper. But that contrast was my advantage. People here judge what they could see. What they couldn't see, they underestimated. That was the entire point. I replayed the memory of Cassandra telling me I was just a plumber and that I should stay outside. She'd said it so casually, so confidently, like I was a student who didn't belong in class. I could have walked out. I could have stormed into the ballroom and pulled her blouse apart, made her choke on her own words. But I didn't. Not because I'm weak, or because I love her, though love may have been there once. No, I held back because the plan wouldn't work if I reacted in the moment. I couldn't heal all the old wounds with an outburst. Instead, I stood here, silent and unseen, knowing that the main act was still ahead. I'd let her humiliation marinate, let her assumptions deepen, until when the light swung the other way, they would show the real me, the one she never saw. I glanced at the banquet tables, laid out with silver platters and plates stacked high with delicacies. I could taste the rich sauces in the air, like promises of opulence I'd never claimed. I realized how little that mattered. My fulfillment didn't come from the softest napkins or the highest thread count of tablecloths. It came from knowing what a job well done smelled and felt like. Clean drains, pressure that didn't sputter, pipes that didn't leak. And yes, maybe a rising bank account to match, but none of that required public spectacle. Still, there was something deeply satisfying about the irony. This mirror-polished ballroom, the symbol of all I'd once thought I needed, was about to be the stage where my real value was revealed. Time wore on. The waiters served the first course, a soup so delicate that it arrived in rippling steam. The second course, a perfectly cooked meat, arrived under silver cloches that opened with a flourish. All of this while I stood in the wings, watching the audience, listening to polite laughter, focusing on the CEO. William Crest was a large man with a voice that carried. I saw him step onto the stage in smart tailoring, a crisp white shirt, no tie. He wanted to look business casual, but thought leadership. He tapped the microphone and waited for the clinking forks to fade. Then his voice rolled across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone respectful yet confident. "Thank you for joining us tonight. Your support means more than you know. Our mission is about building stronger communities through quality housing and sustainable growth. None of this would be possible without partners who believe in that vision." He paused and smiled. "Which brings me to our final and most important honored guest." That was my cue to step out. I straightened my jacket, smoothed my tie. The applause, polite at first, puzzled, grew louder. I crossed under the soft lighting and up the steps to the stage. I caught Cassandra's eye mid-applause. Her lips parted, stunned. I offered a nod, not a bow. The room went quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat hammering against my ribs. Maybe a few understood. Laughter, applause, gasps pealed through the crowd. I stayed calm. I'd rehearsed lines in my head before bed, but I did away with most of them then. I simply said, "Thank you, William. Thank you all. I'm Elijah Clark, proud to be the man behind Clark and Crest Plumbing Partnerships, and honored to stand beside a team that builds more than walls. We build trust." That's when the applause came in full, warm, genuine, and unguarded. Cassandra didn't applaud. I saw her clench and uncurl her fingers, as though she wanted to shout but couldn't. She looked at me with eyes that asked equally two questions I already knew the answers to. "Who are you?" And "Why did you keep me in the dark?" I sensed the shift in the atmosphere, like a room full of air suddenly tilting on its axis. I felt it in my shoes. I heard it in the hushed murmur that followed my words. People around me were reaching for their phones, someone probably Googling Clark and Crest Plumbing Partnership. A few whispered my name in tones of disbelief, admiration, curiosity. I saw the respect in the CEO's eyes. I felt it in my muscles, loosening from tension to quiet confidence. I didn't pause after the applause drained. Instead, I stepped down, made my way through the crowd with a small smile, acknowledging congratulations and startled looks. Cassandra got out of my path. There was no tight grip at my elbow. She didn't know what to do. I felt no triumph. I felt settled. My blood warmed with vindication, yes, but also relief. The night belonged to me now. Later, when I left the stage and rejoined the formalities, Cassandra pointedly found me near the bar. Her voice was low, almost inaudible. "That was a show," she hissed. "But what is that? A hobby? A side gig?" I looked at her long enough to say, "That's my life." Pause. "That's what I do." I turned away because I didn't want to watch her face shrink with confusion. I didn't want to hear the excuses already forming on her lips. Because the moment she realized the severity of her underestimation, was the beginning. I just stood there, collecting the weight of her silence. And nobody would know how long we stayed like that, fronted by chandeliers and glamour, while one marriage quietly cracked. And that was enough, at least for tonight. The applause had already faded by the time I stepped down from the stage, but its echoes lingered in the air like the scent of cedar after rain, subtle, clean, impossible to ignore. I didn't rush back to my table. I moved slowly, purposefully, like a man who belonged exactly where he was. A few people clapped me on the back. Some offered handshakes. Others looked puzzled, searching their mental Rolodexes for a version of me that matched what they'd just heard. I let them wonder. I'd spent a lifetime letting people underestimate me, and now I let the moment swell, not out of vanity, but because I'd earned this. Every burn on my palm, every missed anniversary while I fixed a leaking line, every insult disguised as a joke, I carried all of it into that spotlight. Cassandra was still sitting when I reached our table. She was frozen, face pale and lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. Her wine glass trembled slightly in her hand, and for the first time in a long while, she had nothing to say. "Sit down," she muttered, her eyes darting around the table. "People are watching." I sat, but not for her. I sat because I wanted to remember how this felt. I wanted to remember the silence that fell around us like snowfall. Her colleagues didn't know whether to acknowledge me or avoid me. Most settled on awkward nods, and one woman even offered a quiet congratulations. Cassandra forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I leaned in slowly, my voice low and calm. Still just a plumber? Her nostrils flared. You could have told me. I could have, I agreed. But then you wouldn't have told me to wait outside. She looked away, blinking too fast. I watched her mentally scramble to reframe the narrative, to cast herself not as the villain but the victim of deception. She would try to twist it, turn it into a betrayal, a secret I'd kept maliciously. But deep down, I knew she understood. This wasn't about what I didn't tell her. This was about what she chose not to see. I'd been standing right in front of her the entire time, growing a business, building a future, and she looked through me as if I were background noise. The dinner resumed around us, but we were no longer part of the room. We were an island of tension in a sea of celebration. She barely touched her food, and I sipped from my water with the calm of a man who had nothing left to prove. The MC announced dessert, and polite laughter returned to the air, but Cassandra's fingers gripped her napkin like it was an anchor. Then she leaned closer and hissed, "You set me up. You wanted to humiliate me." I turned toward her slowly, giving her my full attention. "You humiliated yourself." Her face reddened, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. Her words from earlier, "You're just a plumber. Wait outside," were still hanging in the air, unshakable. She tried to pretend she hadn't said them, but I could see the guilt spreading across her expression like ink in water. She was angry not because I'd surprised her. She was angry because her carefully constructed hierarchy, the one where she was the cultured spouse and I was the working-class embarrassment, had crumbled in front of witnesses. We drove home in silence. The tension was thick, hanging between us like fog. I stared out at the city lights, letting them blur into golden smears. Cassandra kept both hands on the wheel, her jaw clenched, her eyes fixed on the road, as if it were the only thing keeping her from screaming. I knew the silence wouldn't last. I knew the explosion was coming, and I braced for it, not with fear, but with weary anticipation. I'd been silent for too long. We had barely stepped into the house when she spun on me. "You let me make a fool of myself." "No," I said, removing my jacket and draping it calmly over the chair. "You did that all on your own." "You should have told me," she shouted. "You made me look like an idiot, like some shallow, clueless." "You're shallow," I said, my voice still steady. "And I was clueless for far too long." She flinched, as if slapped. I took a step closer, not to intimidate her, but to make sure she heard me. "You're angry because I didn't tell you the one thing that would have earned your respect. That says more about you than it does about me." Her eyes welled up, not with tears, but with pure fury. "You betrayed me." I let out a low, humorless laugh. "You betrayed us. Every time you rolled your eyes when I came home smelling like copper. Every time you corrected people, 'He's not a contractor, he's just a plumber.' Every time you made me feel small because I didn't go to the same kind of parties or talk the same polished nonsense." She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. "I've been building something. Not just pipes and property deals, us. A future. And all you saw was dirt under my fingernails." Her face crumpled then, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. That part of me, the part that bent to preserve her image, was gone. She sank onto the edge of the couch, stunned silent, and for once, I let the silence stay. I walked past her, upstairs to our bedroom, each step echoing like punctuation marks. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I simply closed it behind me and leaned against it, breathing in the truth I had held inside for too long. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling and remembered the way her voice had sounded when she dismissed me at the hotel. Not cruel, just indifferent. That's what hurt the most. Indifference. Like I wasn't even part of the world she wanted to show off. But now? Now the truth was out there, undeniable. And the roles had reversed in a way no speech or confrontation could ever undo. She called me a traitor. But I knew better. She wasn't mourning the lie. She was mourning the illusion that she was better, smarter, more refined. And now, stripped of that illusion, she was left sitting in a house built with money she never respected and a man she never understood. And I was done making myself small just to fit into her story. The morning after the fundraiser, the house felt like a mausoleum. Quiet, cold, and full of memories I didn't want anymore. I woke up before sunrise, as I always did, even though I hadn't slept much. Cassandra was already downstairs. I could hear her pacing. I took my time getting dressed, brushing my teeth slowly, like someone preparing for a storm they could smell before it arrived. When I finally came down, she was standing at the kitchen island with a coffee cup in both hands. But it wasn't coffee she wanted, it was control. The second she saw me, her face twisted. "We need to talk," she said. I nodded, pulling out a chair at the dining table, the same one where we used to plan holidays and argue about bills. "Go ahead." She didn't sit. She stood over me like a judge, but her voice cracked the moment she opened her mouth. "You blindsided me, Elijah. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. My colleagues, my boss, God, even the vendors at the event were whispering about us." I waited a moment, then answered evenly, "You humiliated yourself. I just didn't stop you." That stopped her. The silence between us was thick. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but instead, she clenched her jaw and pressed on. "You lied to me. You kept all of this from me, your business deals, your partnership with William Crest, your investments. How long have you been hiding things from me?" "I wasn't hiding anything," I said. "You just never asked. And when I did try to talk about work, you shut me down. You were embarrassed by what I did, remember?" She flinched, but recovered quickly. "Don't twist this around on me. You deceived me." "No," I said, my voice calm and level. "You decided I wasn't worth listening to. You decided your version of me, just a plumber, was the only one that mattered. You made me invisible in our own marriage." Cassandra finally sat, folding into herself in a way I hadn't seen in years. The anger in her eyes was slowly giving way to something more fragile. Panic, maybe, or the realization that I wasn't going to chase her down with apologies. I watched her chest rise and fall, and for a moment, I remembered who she used to be, the woman who'd brought me soup when I worked late, who once wrote notes in my lunch bag, who used to run her fingers through my hair like she was proud I was hers. But that woman had faded long ago, buried under resentment and status anxiety. "So what now?" she asked, her voice brittle. "You gonna leave me? Walk out?" I didn't answer right away. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of the question settle. "I don't know, but I know this can't go on." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, full of disbelief. "So that's it? After all we've built?" "We didn't build anything together," I said quietly. "I built. You watched. And now you're shocked that the foundation is stronger than you thought." She looked away, staring at the marble countertop like it might offer her an answer. "You sound so cold. Like you don't even care." "I do care," I said. "But I also care about me now. I spent years trying to be enough for you, trying to shrink myself to fit into the mold you created. I'm done with that." She stood again, agitated. "You're throwing away 15 years. "No," I said. "You threw them away every time you chose image over intimacy. Every time you made me feel like I wasn't good enough. This," I waved a hand around the room, "at the walls we painted together and the life we thought we were building isn't about one night at a fundraiser. This is about every single moment you chipped away at who I was." She covered her face with her hands, then sat down again with a long, shuddering breath. "I didn't mean to. I didn't realize." "That's the problem," I said. "You never did. You were so busy trying to upgrade your life, you didn't notice it was already valuable. You wanted a polished version of a husband, someone you could parade around like an accessory. But I'm not here to make you look good, Cassandra. I'm here to live." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "So that's it? You're done?" I looked at her for a long time. Her eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if it was from sorrow or fear. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm stepping away for now. I need space. And I need to figure out if there's anything left between us that isn't just resentment." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just nodded once, and it looked like it hurt. I grabbed the bag I had packed the night before and headed toward the door. Before I left, I turned back. "Don't call me unless it's important. I need time to think. And for once, I need you to respect that." And with that, I walked out. Not with anger. Not with malice. Just quiet certainty. I didn't know if I'd ever come back, but I knew I'd finally found my voice, and it felt good to use it. The first night away from the house was oddly peaceful. I stayed in a short-term rental across town, a small, one-bedroom unit with no frills and a view of a parking lot. It was plain, almost sterile, but it was mine for now. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, still wearing the clothes I'd driven in, and just breathed. No tension, no sighs echoing from another room, no half-silent dinners at a table where love used to live. It was the first time in years I wasn't waiting for a reaction, an eye roll, or some quiet insult wrapped in a compliment. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Cassandra didn't call that first night, and I was glad. By the end of the week, the calls started coming. First from Cassandra, then from her sister, then from a mutual friend. Nancy, who once joked that I was surprisingly clever for a plumber. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I needed space, and I meant what I said. If they couldn't see me then, I wasn't going to force them now. Word had started to spread about the fundraiser, the CEO's speech, my secret empire, as someone put it. I didn't correct them. Let them inflate the story. The truth was quieter and more respectable than gossip deserved. But Cassandra? She hated that the narrative wasn't hers to control anymore. I could feel her spinning, desperate to reclaim the spotlight. But all her usual tools, sympathy, pity, seduction, were useless now. My business didn't suffer. In fact, it surged. Contractors I hadn't heard from in months called me for projects. Journalists sent inquiries about my rags to riches story. I declined all interviews. I wasn't a story. I was a man who'd done the work while people like Cassandra laughed behind manicured hands. William invited me to dinner at his home that weekend. His wife hugged me when I arrived. She'd been at the fundraiser. "We've always admired how grounded you are," she said. "Some people in that room could learn from you." I thanked her, but I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Vindication, when quiet, speaks loudest. Meanwhile, Cassandra was unraveling. I heard through Nancy that she'd taken a few days off work. She'd told her team we were going through a rough patch and hinted that I'd betrayed her trust. I wasn't surprised. Cassandra had always been good at spinning a story to keep her social standing intact. But something had changed. The people who once echoed her disdain were hesitant now. They'd seen her performance at the fundraiser. They'd seen me too, and it made them question her version of things. I imagined how much that must have infuriated her. The social circles she once curated so carefully were now whispering behind her back, not mine. After 2 weeks, she called again, this time, leaving a voicemail. "Elijah, I miss you. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please come home. We can fix this. I didn't realize how much I depended on you, not just for support, but for everything. I took you for granted. I know that now." Her voice broke at the end, and for a brief moment, it stirred something in me. Not love, not longing, just sadness. Because I remembered how much I'd hoped she'd say those words years ago when it still would have mattered. But now, they rang hollow. Not because they weren't true, but because they were too late. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at the small dining table in my rental and opened my notebook. Not a laptop, a notebook. I wrote down every sacrifice I'd made in that marriage. The missed family events, the nights I worked late to pay off her credit cards, the dreams I shelved because she rolled her eyes at them. Then I made another list, things I'd done for myself since leaving. Slept peacefully, reconnected with old friends, felt proud of my work without minimizing it. The second list was longer, and that told me everything. The next day, I met with a lawyer, not to file anything yet, but to understand my options. I wanted clarity, not revenge. The lawyer was kind, but firm. "People like you," she said, "they wait too long. They think staying silent is noble. It's not. It's surrender." I nodded. I'm done surrendering. Back at the house, Cassandra had started staging her own campaign. She invited my parents for dinner. She posted a carefully filtered photo of us from 5 years ago with the caption, "Every marriage has its seasons. We're weathering ours." I didn't comment, but I knew she was testing the waters, trying to measure how much public sympathy she could regain. What she didn't understand was that I no longer cared about appearances. I wasn't playing the same game. A week later, she asked to meet. Neutral ground, a coffee shop near our old neighborhood. I agreed. She arrived first, looking exhausted but composed. A soft gray sweater, minimal makeup, hair tied back. She looked more like the woman I met 15 years ago than the one who'd sneered at my calloused hands at galas. "Elijah," she said, as I sat her day, "I've been thinking about everything." I sipped my coffee. "Okay. I was awful to you," she said, voice low. "I know that. But I was scared. I always felt like I needed to prove something. That I wasn't just some girl who married a plumber." "And what were you trying to prove?" I asked. She swallowed. That I mattered. You always mattered, I said. But you made me feel like I didn't. She nodded, her hands clenched around the paper cup. I'm trying to change. I've been seeing someone, therapist. It's not an excuse, but it's a start. I looked at her for a long moment. I'm glad. Truly. But I don't know if I can come back to who we were. Her eyes shimmered. Could we start over? Just talk again. I didn't say no. But I didn't say yes either. I stood, placed a 20 on the table, and said, I need more time. Outside, the air was crisp. I felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because I wasn't holding it in anymore. Cassandra might have been unraveling, but I was finding peace, not in her apologies, but in my boundaries. And I wasn't going to give that up for anything. It had been 3 months since the fundraiser. 90 days of clarity, of separation, of waking up without Cassandra's sighs slicing through the morning silence. At first, I counted the days like a prisoner marking time on a wall. But as the weeks passed, those marks became symbols of something else, liberation. Each morning, I rose with less weight on my chest. I still ran Clark and Crest, still met with contractors and drafted bids, but something in my gait had changed. I stood straighter, not because my status had risen, but because I no longer bent myself around someone else's disappointment. I was no longer performing respectability for a woman who couldn't see the worth in hard work unless it came wrapped in luxury. The final message came on a Sunday. I was fixing the faucet in my rental. Old brass with a leak that reminded me of my earliest days on the job, when Cassandra's name lit up on my phone. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened. I miss us, she said softly. Not the fighting. Not the show. Just us. The way you used to look at me when I said something stupid. The way we laughed in the car on rainy nights. I miss that. I miss you. Her voice was trembling, fragile. There was a time when those words would have split me in half. When I would have grabbed my keys, driven through the night, and let her cry in my arms until we forgot everything else. But now, her words were like wind against glass. Heard, felt, but unable to shake the foundation I'd finally built for myself. I didn't call her back. Instead, I stood at the mirror in the bathroom and looked at myself. Not for vanity, but because I wanted to really see the man I'd become. The fine lines near my eyes from years of squinting into dark crawl spaces. The creases around my mouth, some from stress, some from laughing with crew members after a long job. My hands were still rough, my knuckles scarred, but they were strong, capable. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to apologize for them. I thought about all the things I used to swallow. The snide remarks at dinner parties. The way Cassandra would gently steer conversations away from my business like it was something dirty. The eye rolls when I tracked mud into the house. I had absorbed those slights like a sponge, thinking love meant endurance. But love, real love, wasn't supposed to make you disappear. It wasn't supposed to shrink you. People often say that time heals, but I don't think that's true. Time just gives you the distance to see things clearly. Time peels back the gloss and makes you ask questions you were too scared to ask before. Questions like, why did I stay so long? Why was her approval worth more than my peace? The answers don't come easily, but they come. And when they do, they burn away the illusion like fire through fog. Cassandra and I hadn't filed for divorce yet, but the paperwork was ready. My lawyer said I could serve them at any time. I was still deciding, not because I wanted to go back, but because I didn't want to be impulsive. I wanted to move with intention now. Every decision had to come from the man I'd become, not the man I used to be. The one who bit his tongue to keep the peace. The one who walked into rooms already bracing for shame. I took my time. I started cooking for myself again. Nothing fancy, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, pasta with fresh garlic. But I lit a candle at the table, played jazz in the background, and sat down like I was worth the ritual. I read again books that had nothing to do with plumbing or finance. Just stories. Stories of people finding their way through heartbreak and coming out whole. I called my parents more. I laughed with my crew. I stopped apologizing for the things that made me real. A few friends reached out to say they admired how I handled it all. You showed real restraint, one of them said. Most men would have thrown it in her face. But I wasn't interested in revenge. The punishment wasn't public shame or sharp words. The real punishment, for both of us, was silence. My absence. The space where my presence used to be. Cassandra had lived so long assuming I needed her approval. Now she lived knowing I didn't need anything from her at all. And that, I think, was harder to bear than any confrontation. One evening, I drove past our old house, not to stalk or linger, just to see it one last time. The lights were on. Her car was in the driveway. But I didn't stop. I just kept going. Because what once felt like home now felt like a stage I'd finally walked off of. At a stoplight, I glanced in the rearview mirror and whispered something I hadn't said aloud before. I'm proud of you. And I meant it. I was proud, not for building a business, or for being recognized by people in suits, but for choosing myself, for setting a boundary and standing by it, for walking away not in bitterness, but in quiet strength. That's how I knew the story had ended, not with a bang, not with tears, but with clarity. And sometimes, that's all the closure you need. If this story spoke to you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to choose peace over pride? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story that digs deep into family, betrayal, and self-preservation. See you soon in the next one.